Alright, imagine opening a history book, but instead of names and dates, you're flipping through moments of collective human struggle. War, disease, disaster, economic collapse. Decade after decade, humanity has faced events so intense they reshaped the world. In this deep dive, we're going to walk through some of the hardest periods we've experienced in the last 100 plus years. Not to dwell on suffering, but to remember what we've come through, what we've learned, and why resilience isn't just a word, it's a defining human trait. Let's start from the early 1900s and climb our way through history. 1910s, the Great War and the Spanish Flu. World War I, 1914 to 1918, was one of the deadliest conflicts in history. Trench warfare, chemical weapons, and global involvement led to over 20 million deaths. Just as the war ended, the 1918 influenza pandemic struck. In just over a year, the virus killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide. Hospitals were overwhelmed, cities shut down, and masks became part of daily life, a grim foreshadowing of events a century later. 1920s, post-war chaos and silent epidemics. The Roaring Twenties are often romanticized, but not everyone prospered. Many countries faced political instability, poverty, and the lingering effects of war trauma. In Russia, the Civil War and resulting famine killed millions. Meanwhile, untreated diseases like tuberculosis continued to take lives silently, with few medical answers at the time. 1930s, the Great Depression and rising tyranny. The 1930s began with the stock market crash of 1929, spiraling into a global economic depression. Unemployment rates soared, poverty was widespread, and despair ran deep. At the same time, authoritarian regimes rose in Germany, Italy, and Japan, setting the stage for an even darker chapter. 1940s, World War II and the Holocaust. World War II, 1939 to 1945, was humanity's deadliest conflict, claiming over 70 million lives. Cities were bombed, civilians targeted, and entire populations displaced. The Holocaust remains one of history's most horrifying atrocities. 6 million Jews, and millions of others, were systematically murdered. As the war ended, nuclear weapons were introduced with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world would never be the same. 1950s, Cold War tensions and forgotten conflicts. While many nations rebuilt after World War II, the 1950s were marked by Cold War anxieties. Nuclear fear loomed large, with schoolchildren practicing duck and cover drills. In Korea, a brutal war from 1950 to 1953 caused millions of deaths, but was overshadowed in history books. Meanwhile, polio outbreaks continued to paralyze thousands of children until a vaccine emerged late in the decade. 1960s, assassinations, Vietnam, and civil unrest. The 1960s were turbulent. In the U.S., the civil rights movement gained ground, but not without violence. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy were assassinated. The Vietnam War escalated, claiming millions of lives and sparking global protests. Famines in countries like China and Biafra, Nigeria, led to massive loss of life, often hidden from global view. 1970s, economic crises and genocide. The oil crisis of 1973 triggered global economic turmoil. Inflation soared, and many countries struggled to adjust. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge regime led a genocide that killed nearly 2 million people in just 4 years. Terrorist attacks and hijackings became frequent, including the Munich Olympics tragedy in 1972. 1980s, the AIDS epidemic and famine. A mysterious illness began spreading, first misunderstood and stigmatized. The HIV/AIDS epidemic would go on to kill tens of millions. In the early years, fear, misinformation, and inaction allowed it to spread rapidly. In Ethiopia, a massive famine from 1983 to 1985 killed around 1 million people. The world responded with aid concerts and campaigns, but not before countless lives were lost. 1990s, ethnic cleansing and genocide. The 1990s saw horrific violence in places like Rwanda and the Balkans. In 1994, the Rwandan genocide killed 800,000 people in just 100 days. The Bosnian War included the Srebrenica massacre, the worst mass killing in Europe since World War II. Meanwhile, the First Gulf War introduced new forms of warfare, and economic crises hit parts of Asia and Latin America hard. 2000s, terrorism, tsunamis, and recession. The September 11th attacks in 2001 redefined global security. Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq followed, lasting decades. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami killed over 230,000 people across 14 countries. And in 2008, a global financial crisis triggered mass unemployment, home foreclosures, and instability worldwide. 2010s, civil wars and climate catastrophes. The Syrian civil war, starting in 2011, has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. Similar unrest spread across the Middle East in the Arab Spring. In 2014, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa created widespread panic and overwhelmed fragile health systems. Meanwhile, extreme weather events intensified, from hurricanes to wildfires, driven by climate change. 2020s, a global pandemic and beyond. The COVID-19 pandemic, 2020 to 2022, brought the world to a standstill. Over 7 million lives were lost, and economies were disrupted. Isolation, grief, and uncertainty became universal. As the decade continues, challenges remain: ongoing wars, inflation, political polarization, and a rapidly warming planet. But there's hope too: vaccines developed at record speed, global aid efforts, and technological breakthroughs show what humanity is capable of when united. Final thoughts. Looking back at these years isn't about despair. It's about perspective. Every generation has faced its own trials, some unimaginably hard. But through each crisis, people survived. Communities helped each other. Science advanced. Laws changed. And the human spirit endured. There's a reason history remembers struggle, not just to mourn, but to honor the strength it took to overcome. These events shaped the systems, protections, and technologies we benefit from today. And they remind us, while we can't always prevent tragedy, we can learn, prepare, and support one another when it counts most. History is filled with hardship, but also with healing, rebuilding, and relentless progress. As we face our own set of global challenges, remembering the past reminds us, we've been through worse. And we've made it through, together. If this journey through history gave you a new perspective, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and share this with someone who loves understanding the bigger picture. And in the comments, let us know what event in your lifetime has impacted you the most. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and never forget what we've overcome to get here.